What would you do if you woke up 7 years before the end of the world and you were the only person on Earth who remembered it? Not a dream, not a feeling, a memory. The smell of the dust, the silence of a city where no engine has run in months, the weight of a dying dog in your arms while the sky above you is the color of an old wound. What would you do with 7 years if you knew, with absolute certainty, the exact day the lights would go out for the last time? Who would you call first? Who would you save? Who would you let go? My name is Luna, and I have spent more time than I care to admit walking beside men and women who were given impossible second chances. Some of them used those chances well. Some of them broke under the weight of knowing. But there is one story I keep coming back to, because of all the regressors I have ever watched. This one understood something the others did not. He understood that you cannot save everyone. He understood that the gift of memory is not a sword, it is a list. A small, painful, beautiful list of names you can carry in your pocket. And on the day the world ends, you will be measured not by how many you saved, but by whether you remembered to look the right people in the eye while there was still time. His name was Zane Hunterfold. He was 33 years old when the world ended the first time. He was 33 years old again when he opened his eyes 7 years earlier and realized he was the only soul on this planet who knew what was coming. And before I tell you what he did with those 7 years, before I tell you about the bunker, the 200 souls, the radio signal from the second regressor, before any of that, you need to understand what he was running from. Because the end of the world did not come from war. It did not come from disease. It came from something quieter. Something that lived in the air for months before anyone noticed it, and by the time the scientists understood, there was no one left to tell. But that is the end of the story. Let me take you back to the beginning, to a man kneeling in the dust of a city that no longer had a name, holding the only living thing he had left. The city used to be called by a name. Zane could not remember which name. After 30 years of collapse, the names of cities had become less useful than the shapes of the ruins. He knew this place by its skyline, the 2 leaning towers in the east, the cathedral with its missing roof, the river that ran black because nothing alive lived in it anymore. He had walked through this city when he was a boy. His grandfather had brought him here once, to a baseball game, and Zane had spilled soda on his shirt, and his grandfather had laughed and said it was a baptism. That was 40 years ago. The stadium where they had sat was now a crater filled with ash. Zane was 33. He looked 60. His hair, what was left of it, was gray, and his hands shook when he held anything heavier than a cup. He had not eaten in 4 days. He had not seen another living human in 3 years. The last human he had seen was a woman named Petra, who had walked west looking for a colony she had heard about on a radio that no longer worked. Zane had given her his last can of beans and his blessing. He did not know if she found the colony. He suspected she had not. Nobody found anything anymore. But Zane was not alone. In his lap, breathing in small, ragged pulls, was a golden retriever named Baron. Baron had been a puppy once. Zane could still remember the day, 26 years ago, when his sister Cora had brought home a squirming bundle of fur from a shelter in their old neighborhood and announced that this was the new family member and nobody had a vote. Baron had been Cora's dog for the first year. Then he had been the whole family's dog. Then, after the collapse, when Cora was gone and the family was gone and there was nothing left but a few survivors stumbling between ruins, Baron had become Zane's dog. They had walked together across what was left of 3 countries. Baron had been with him for every winter, every fire, every dawn that came up gray instead of gold. Baron was 26 years old. Golden retrievers do not live to 26. Zane was not stupid enough to think Baron's longevity was natural. Something about the world after the fall had bent the rules. Things lived longer when they should have died, and things died sooner when they should have lived. Baron had stayed alive because Zane needed him to stay alive, and because Baron, in some way Zane could not explain, had decided he was not going to leave first. But now, in the cold of what might have been autumn, in a city without a name, Baron was finally leaving. Zane held him. He stroked the gray fur around Baron's ears. He whispered the things you whisper to a dog when there is no one else to whisper to. Good boy. You were always the best boy. Thank you for staying. Thank you for waiting. You can go now. You can rest." Baron's eyes were closed. His tail moved once, then stopped. The ribcage rose and fell, then rose and did not fall again. Zane did not cry. He had used up all of his tears years ago. He sat in the dust with the body of his oldest friend in his lap, and he looked up at the sky, which was the color of bruised meat, and he said, out loud, to no one, "I am done. I am ready. Take me too." He closed his eyes. He was not sure if he meant to die. He was not sure if dying was even a choice anymore. The world had taken so much from him that it was not clear what was left to take. He lay down beside Baron, and he put one arm across the dog's chest, the way he used to do on winter nights in the old apartment when Baron was a puppy and afraid of thunder. He felt the cold of the ground under his shoulder. He felt the wind move across his face. He waited. And then something happened that does not happen. The cold went away. The wind went away. The smell of dust and ash and the faint chemical sweetness that meant the air itself had been poisoned, all of it went away. Zane felt warmth. Not the warmth of a fire, which always smelled of burning plastic and dead trees. Real warmth, sunlight warmth, the kind he had not felt since he was a child. He kept his eyes closed because he was afraid of what he would see if he opened them. He thought, this is what dying feels like. This is the brain shutting down. This is the last small mercy. Let it last. Let it last a little longer. But then he felt something on his face, something wet, something small and frantic and warm. Something was licking him. Zane opened his eyes. He was lying on his back on a soft surface. Above him was a ceiling he had not seen in 3 decades. White paint, slightly cracked near the light fixture. The same crack that had been there when he had moved into this apartment in his late 20s because the rent was cheap and the building had a balcony that faced east. He turned his head slowly, terrified, certain that if he moved too fast, the vision would shatter. On the bed beside him, half on his chest, was a golden retriever puppy. Round belly, floppy ears, eyes the color of honey. The puppy was licking his face with the desperation of an animal who has just realized that the giant beside him is alive and therefore must be welcomed properly. The puppy's collar had a small metal tag. Zane reached up with a hand that was no longer gray and no longer shaking. He turned the tag. The name engraved on it was Baron. Zane Hunterfold made a sound that was not a word, and was not a scream, and was not a sob. It was something in between, the sound of a soul rearranging itself. He pulled the puppy to his chest and he held him there, and Baron, who did not understand anything except that this human smelled good and seemed to need a great deal of attention, settled in and began to chew gently on Zane's earlobe. Zane sat up. He looked around the room, his old bedroom, the poster on the wall of a band he had not listened to in 20 years, the desk by the window where he had once written terrible poetry, the clock on the nightstand, which read 7:47 in the morning, the calendar on the wall, which he had hung there because his mother had given it to him for his birthday and he had felt obligated. The date on the calendar was March 14th. Zane stood up. Baron protested. Zane walked to the window, still holding the puppy, and he pulled back the curtain. Below him, the street he had walked 1,000 times, the bakery on the corner that made coffee too strong, the bus stop where he used to wait for the number 42. The trees, alive, leafed out in the pale green of early spring. People, walking, driving, living. A man in a blue jacket crossed the street with a phone pressed to his ear. A woman with a stroller laughed at something her child had said. A delivery driver double-parked and ran into the convenience store across the way. Zane Hunterfold, the last human on Earth, watched them, and he understood, in the way you understand a thing when your whole body knows it before your brain can catch up, that he had 7 years. He counted backward in his head. The first sign of the collapse had been on a Tuesday in November, 7 years from this moment. He had time. He had memory. He had a list somewhere in his head of every single thing that was about to go wrong. He had Baron. He sat down on the floor of his old bedroom, holding the puppy, and for the first time in 3 decades, Zane Hunterfold cried. Not the dry, used-up grief of a man who has lost everything. The wet, helpless, relieved crying of a man who has been given the one thing he never thought he would have again: time. Now I want you to stop for a moment. I want you to think about something, because before this story gets bigger, before there are bunkers and survivors and government agents and second regressors, before any of that, there is this. A man on the floor of a small apartment holding a puppy who does not yet know he is a miracle. A man who has been given the one thing none of us will ever be given, a do-over. And the first question he asks himself before he asks anything else is not how do I save the world? It is not how do I get rich? It is not how do I become powerful? The first question Zane Hunterfold asks himself, sitting on that floor with Baron in his arms, is who do I call first? Think about that, because that question is the whole story. He sat there for almost an hour. Baron eventually fell asleep against his chest, the small body rising and falling with the easy breath of a creature who has never known fear. Zane listened to the sounds of the building, the pipes ticking as the heat came on, somebody's television murmuring through the wall. Footsteps on the floor above him. Footsteps. Living footsteps. Somebody walking around their apartment, doing whatever it is people do at 8 in the morning on a Tuesday in March. Margaret. Her name was Margaret Holloway. She lived in the apartment directly above his. She was 61 years old in this moment, a retired school teacher, a widow, the kind of neighbor who left a plate of cookies outside your door at Christmas and apologized for the noise when she vacuumed on Sunday mornings, even though her vacuuming was the quietest thing in the building. Zane had spoken to her maybe a dozen times in the 3 years he had lived in this apartment. He had nodded at her in the hallway. He had held the door for her when she came in with groceries. He had not, in any meaningful sense, known her. 6 months from this moment, in the early hours of a Wednesday in September, 3 men would break into Margaret Holloway's apartment looking for cash and prescription medication. Margaret would wake up. She would scream. The men would panic. They would not mean to kill her, but they would kill her. And Zane, sleeping 1 floor below, would hear nothing, because the building was old and the floors were thick. And he would learn about Margaret's death the next morning from a police officer in the lobby. He would feel sad for about a week. He would attend her funeral because nobody else from the building would, and he would discover, listening to the eulogy, that Margaret had been a Peace Corps volunteer in her 20s and had once met a famous folk singer at a protest in 1968. He would think, I wish I had known, and he would forget her within a year. That was the first time. This was the second. Zane stood up. He carried Baron to the kitchen, which was exactly as he remembered it, down to the chipped mug in the sink. He found a bowl. He filled it with water. He set Baron down, and Baron, recognizing this ritual without having performed it yet in this timeline, began to drink with the noisy enthusiasm of a puppy who has decided water is a wonderful invention. Zane opened a drawer. He took out a pen and a piece of paper. He sat down at the kitchen table, and he began to write a list. The first name in the list was Margaret Holloway. The second name was his sister, Cora Hunterfold, who in 5 years would die in a car accident on a wet road in Oregon because she was driving home from a job she hated to a relationship that was killing her. The accident was technically not her fault. But Cora, in the months before her death, had been so exhausted, so used up by a man Zane had despised but had never said anything about, that her reflexes were slow and her attention was thin, and the truck that hydroplaned into her lane caught her 3 seconds before she would have caught it. Zane had been the one to identify the body. He had not spoken to Cora in 6 weeks at the time of her death because of a stupid argument about Christmas plans. He had spent the next 30 years carrying that 6 weeks in his chest like a stone. The third name was Dr. Elias Renner. Zane had never met Dr. Renner in his old life, but 3 years from this moment, Dr. Renner would publish a paper in an obscure journal about an unusual atmospheric reading in the upper troposphere. The paper would be ignored, Renner would be ridiculed, he would lose his university position and would die 4 years after that of a stress-induced heart attack at the age of 52. After the collapse, when the survivors began to piece together what had actually happened to the world, somebody would find Renner's paper in an archive, and they would understand that he had seen it coming, and that nobody had listened, and that he had died believing he was a failure. The fourth name was Professor Iris Vance. Vance was a climatologist at a small university in the Northwest. She had also published warnings. She had also been ignored. She had survived the first 2 years of the collapse and had run a small camp of about 40 people in the mountains before a raid by a group of armed scavengers had ended her camp and ended her. Zane had heard about her from another survivor years later. He had thought even then that if there had been more people like Vance, the collapse might have been survivable. The fifth name was a child. A boy named Tomas Breg, who in 2 years would be 6 years old, would be walking home from school in a city Zane had never visited and would be hit by a drunk driver. Zane did not know how he knew this. He had read it in a news article years ago before the collapse. The article had been about the driver, who had been the son of a wealthy man and who had served almost no time. Zane had not remembered the article for any specific reason. It had just stuck. The boy's name had stuck. Tomas Breg, 6 years old. A small obituary photograph with a gap in his front teeth. Zane wrote the names. He wrote them slowly, in careful handwriting, because he understood that this list was the most important document he would ever produce. He wrote them on a piece of printer paper with a cheap blue pen at a kitchen table in an apartment that he had once thought of as small and would now think of as a temple. By the time he was finished, there were 47 names on the list. Some of them he could save with a phone call. Some of them would require years of careful preparation. Some of them he was not sure he could save at all. But every single name on the list was a person he had failed the first time. Every single name was a debt. He looked at the list for a long time. Then he put down the pen. He picked Baron up. Baron was a warm, sleepy weight in his arms. Zane carried him into the living room. He sat down on the couch. He turned on the television, which was running a morning news program he had not watched in 30 years. The anchor was talking about a bill in Congress that Zane could not remember the outcome of and did not care about. There was a commercial for a car that would be recalled in 18 months. There was a weather forecast that promised a warm spring. Zane watched it all. He held his puppy. He breathed the air, which did not smell of chemicals or ash or dust, which smelled instead of coffee from the bakery downstairs, and his own laundry detergent, and the faint warmth of a dog who needed a bath, but not yet. He listened to Margaret Holloway moving around in her apartment above him, opening a cupboard, running the tap, doing whatever it was that 61-year-old widows did with their mornings. And Zane Hunterfold made a decision. He was not going to be a hero. He was not going to warn the world. The world would not listen to him any more than it had listened to Dr. Renner or Professor Vance. He was not going to march into a television studio with a list of prophecies and demand that someone take him seriously. That path led to a psychiatric ward, and from a psychiatric ward, you cannot save anyone. He was not going to try to stop the collapse. The collapse was not a thing that could be stopped by one man with 7 years of memory. The collapse was a wave that had been building for a century, and Zane Hunterfold was one small swimmer in an enormous ocean, and the only thing he could do was swim toward the people he loved and hold on to them when the wave hit. He was going to save the people on his list. He was going to build a place for them to be safe, and he was going to do it quietly, because the world that had ignored Renner would also ignore him, and the only currency he had that the world could not take away from him was time. He picked up the phone, which was an old flip phone he had not held in 3 decades, and he dialed his sister Cora. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was so familiar that Zane had to close his eyes. He had forgotten what she sounded like before the years of exhaustion had ground her down. He had forgotten that she used to laugh when she answered the phone. He had forgotten the small upward tilt at the end of her hellos, the one their mother had also had. "Hey," Cora said. "What's up, you okay?" Zane could not speak for a moment. He gripped the phone hard enough that his fingers hurt. Baron, sensing something, climbed onto his lap and licked his chin. "Yeah," Zane finally said. "Yeah, I'm okay. I wanted to say something, and I know it's going to sound weird." "Okay," Cora said in the careful voice she used when she thought her brother was about to confess to something embarrassing. Zane took a breath. He said, "I love you. I know I don't say it. I know we had that stupid fight about Mom's birthday last month, and I haven't called you since. I'm sorry. I love you. You are the most important person in my life, and I have been a bad brother, and I am going to be a better one, starting now." "Okay." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Cora said, very softly, "Are you dying?" "No," Zane said, and for the first time since he had opened his eyes that morning, he laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised out of him by his sister's perfect, predictable Cora-ness. "No," he said, "I am not dying. I am the opposite of dying. I had a dream last night. A really bad dream. And I woke up and I realized I have been wasting time. So I am calling you to tell you I love you. And I am going to call you tomorrow and the day after that. And I want you to come visit me this weekend. Can you do that? Can you come this weekend?" Another silence. Then Cora said, in a voice that was trying very hard not to crack, Yeah, I can come this weekend. Are you sure you're okay?" "I am better than okay," Zane said. "I will see you Saturday. Drive carefully. I love you." He hung up. He sat on the couch with Baron in his lap and the phone in his hand, and he understood, with a clarity that he had never felt in either of his lives, that he had just done the single most important thing he was ever going to do. Not the bunker he would build, not the 200 souls he would save, not the radio signal from the second regressor that would change everything. None of that. The most important thing he was ever going to do in either timeline was tell his sister he loved her on a Tuesday morning in March while she was still alive to hear it. And now I want to stop the story here, because I, Luna, who have walked beside many regressors and many second chancers and many people given impossible gifts, I want to ask you something. I want you to do something for me. I want you to think of one person. Just one. Somebody you have not called in too long. Somebody whose voice you have started to forget. Somebody you had a stupid fight with about a birthday, or a holiday, or something nobody can even remember the substance of anymore. Somebody who is still alive, today, in the same world as you. Somebody you will, one day, hold for the last time, whether you recognize it as the last time or not. You do not have 7 years of foreknowledge. You do not have a list of 47 names. You do not have a Baron sleeping in your lap to remind you that miracles are possible. What you have is something smaller and quieter and infinitely more valuable. You have today. You have the rest of this afternoon. You have a phone in your pocket and a number you have not dialed. Zane Hunterfold needed to die in a poisoned city and wake up 7 years earlier before he understood what you can understand right now while you are listening to my voice. Do not wait for an apocalypse to teach you what your life is for. Do not wait for the second chance, because most of us do not get one. The first chance is the only chance, and the first chance is happening to you right now as you breathe. So when this video is done, when Luna has stopped talking and the credits have rolled and your screen has gone dark, I want you to make the call. Whoever it is, whatever the fight was, pick up the phone, tell them you love them, tell them you are sorry. Tell them you will see them on Saturday, because the rest of this story, the bunker and the 200 souls and the day the sky turned red, all of it grew from a single phone call on a Tuesday morning in March. A man telling his sister he loved her. That was the seed. Everything else was just what grew from it. Now, let me take you forward. Let me take you to the day Zane Hunterfold met Dr. Elias Renner for the first time, in a coffee shop in a college town, holding a folder of predictions that Renner did not yet know would all come true. Let me take you to the day Margaret Holloway opened her door to find her downstairs neighbor on the landing at 3 in the morning, asking her, please, please do not be alone tonight. Let me take you to the day Cora Hunterfold drove up to her brother's apartment for a weekend visit and found him standing on the curb with a golden retriever puppy, and the moment she got out of her car, before she even said hello, Zane walked up to her and put his arms around her and held her for so long that the neighbors looked out their windows. Let me take you to the moment, 5 years from that Tuesday in March, when Cora Hunterfold sat on her brother's couch in the half-built compound and asked him, finally, the question she had been afraid to ask for years. How did you know? How did you know any of it? And Zane reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, folded so many times the creases had become soft, with 47 names on it in cheap blue pen, and he handed it to her. And he did on that first afternoon after he hung up the phone with his sister. Because what he did next was the smallest and the strangest and the most beautiful thing he did in any of those 7 years. He took Baron for a walk. He clipped a leash to the puppy's collar, he put on his shoes, He carried Baron down the stairs because Baron was too small to handle them yet, and he set him down on the sidewalk in front of the building, and he watched Baron sniff a piece of grass with the absolute concentration of a creature for whom grass is a new invention. Then Zane Hunterfold, the last man on Earth, walked his puppy around the block. He nodded at people he passed. He smiled at a woman with a stroller. He let Baron stop to investigate a fire hydrant. He felt the sun on his face. He felt the wind move the leaves of a tree he had walked past 1,000 times and never looked at. He breathed in the smell of bread from the bakery on the corner, and he understood, the way you understand a thing when you have lost it and been given it back, that this was paradise. That this had always been paradise. That every human being walking past him on this ordinary Tuesday morning was living inside a miracle and had no idea, and that the only difference between him and them was that he, just for now, just for a little while, could see it. He walked his dog, he went home, he started his work. But that, my friends, is a story for the next chapter. And before I tell you what was in the folder Zane handed to Dr. Renner, before I tell you what happened the night Margaret Holloway's door was supposed to break open, before I tell you about the government agent named Halden who started watching the compound in year 4 and the radio signal that came through in year 8 from a bunker on the other side of the continent, I need you to do the one thing this episode has been building toward. Make the call. I will be waiting for you in the next episode, and so will Zane. And so will Baron, who by then will be a full-grown dog, gray around the muzzle but strong, sleeping at the feet of a man who once held him in the ruins of a city without a name and whispered, "You can go now," and was given, instead, the chance to say, "You can stay." This was Luna. The list is real. The time is now. I will see you on the other side. Sighed him in the snow. She did not touch him at first. She put the lantern down, very carefully, the way a person puts down something precious in front of something they do not yet understand. And then she reached out one ungloved hand and she touched his cheek, and her fingers were so cold they burned. "Pa," she said again. "He looks like Pa did, before." The pregnant woman had reached them by then. She lowered herself slowly, painfully, onto her knees in the snow, and she looked at Aiden's face for a long time. Her eyes were wet, but her mouth was set hard. She said, "He's not your pa, Selena. Your pa is at home. This is someone else." "But he looks like him," the girl whispered. "Before the legs." Before the legs. I want you to mark that phrase. Before the legs. Aiden did not understand it yet, but his body, which was somehow not his old body and somehow entirely his, understood that those 3 words were the shape of everything that was wrong in this valley. The old woman had reached them last. She did not kneel because her knees would not allow it anymore. She stood over Aiden in the snow, and she looked down at him with eyes that were the color of wet river stones. She said, "He'll die out here in an hour, whoever he is." The pregnant woman closed her eyes. She did the arithmetic in her head, and I have walked through that arithmetic with her in my mind 100 times, and I will tell you what it was. It was this. They had 1 potato left in the cellar. They had a quarter loaf of bread that the grandmother had been saving for the father's birthday in 2 days. They had a handful of dried beans. They had no meat. The father could not hunt. The brother had died last spring. The hired man had left in autumn because they could not pay him, and winter was not even half over. She opened her eyes. She looked at the girl Selena, who was still touching Aiden's cheek with her bare hand, and she said the words that broke everything open. She said, "Then we'll have to bring him home." That is how Aiden Steelblade arrived at the Hollowfield cabin, carried on a sledge of pine branches lashed together with strips of the grandmother's shawl, dragged across half a mile of snow by a teenage girl, a pregnant woman, and an old woman with 1 tooth. They did not speak the whole way. They did not have the breath to. Selena pulled the front of the sledge. The mother pushed from the side, one hand always on her belly. The grandmother walked behind because she could not pull and she could not push, but she could watch for wolves, and there were wolves in that valley, and they knew it. When they reached the cabin, the door opened before they got to it, and the man in the doorway was the man on the porch I described to you at the beginning. Tomas Hollowfield, 34 years old. He had stood up out of his wheelchair with his arms braced against both sides of the doorframe, and his withered legs trembling under him because he had heard his women coming home with something heavy, and he had not been willing to greet them sitting down. That is the kind of man he was. He could barely stand. He stood anyway. When he saw Aiden on the sledge, he did not ask. He did not say a word. He simply moved aside, holding the door, and he watched his daughter and his wife and his mother drag a dying stranger across the threshold of a house that had nothing left to give, and he closed the door behind them. They put Aiden by the fire. They stripped him out of the wet rags and they wrapped him in every blanket the house possessed, which was 4 blankets, and 2 of them had holes. The grandmother set water to boil. The mother sat down heavily on the bench and pressed both hands to her lower back. The girl Selena knelt beside Aiden and she watched his face, and her eyes did not leave him, and she did not say anything more about her father. Aiden was conscious through almost all of this. He could not move and he could not speak, but he could see and he could hear. He saw the inside of that cabin, and he saw what poverty looks like when poverty has had a long time to settle in. He saw the empty hooks above the hearth where smoked meat used to hang. He saw the bare shelves. He saw 2 little girls peek around the corner of a back room and then disappear again. He saw the father lower himself very carefully back into his wheelchair, and he saw the wheelchair was made of bent ash wood and leather straps, and one wheel was a wagon wheel, and the other wheel was a smaller wheel from something else entirely. And Aiden understood, even half frozen, that this man had built that chair himself because nobody was going to build it for him. And then the grandmother brought a wooden bowl over to the fire, and she dipped it in a stew pot, and she came and knelt beside Aiden, and she put the bowl to his lips. And Aiden tasted what was in the bowl, and the bowl was hot water with 1/4 of 1 potato cut very small, and 3 flakes of dried herb, and nothing else. And he understood that this was dinner, not his dinner, their dinner, and they were giving it to him first. He tried to refuse. He could not make his mouth work, but he tried to turn his head. The grandmother saw him try. And she said, with her one tooth showing because she was almost smiling, she said, "Drink, boy, you drink, or it's wasted. Wasted's worse than gone." He drank. That night, while the family slept on the floor around the hearth because they had given him the only bed, Aiden Steelblade lay awake in a house in a valley in a world that was not his, and he listened to 7 people breathing. He counted them. The girl breathing fast and light. The pregnant mother breathing slow with a small catch in it. The grandmother breathing thin. The father breathing in his wheelchair by the door because he had refused to leave the door unguarded. And 2 small breaths from the back room that he had not seen yet, the 2 little girls. And 1 more breath, a tiny one, almost too small to hear, and that was the baby that had not been born yet, breathing through its mother's body in the dark. 7 people, 1 potato, and they had given him the first sip. He did not cry. He did not have the water in him to cry, but something inside Aiden Steelblade, in that bed, in that cabin, in that valley, made a decision that he did not consciously make. His body made it. His training made it. The 4 years and 2 months of running into burning buildings made it. He decided he was not going to die in this house, and he decided that none of them were going to die in this house either. He did not know how. He did not know what was wrong with the father's legs. He did not know why the shelves were bare. He did not know what the curse was that he could already feel hanging in the air of that valley like the smell before a storm. But he knew, the way a firefighter knows the difference between a fire that can be saved and a fire that cannot, that this house was still savable. Barely, just barely. If somebody started moving now. He slept. When he woke, it was morning, and the girl Selena was sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the bed with a cup of water in her hands, waiting for him to wake up so she could give him the cup. He took it, he drank, and the moment the water touched his tongue, he knew. It was a small thing, a taste at the back of the throat, a faint metallic edge, like a copper coin held under the tongue, but mixed with something sweeter, almost chalky. Most people would not have noticed it. Most people drinking that water their whole lives would have stopped noticing it before they were 10 years old. But Aiden Steelblade had spent 4 years and 2 months on a fire crew, and one of the things a fire crew learns, because it has to, is the taste of water that has been touched by metal. Burned pipes, old solder, industrial runoff, the taste of water that should not be drunk. He held the cup very still. He looked at the girl. He looked past her at the father in the wheelchair, who was awake now and watching him with a careful, neutral expression that Aiden recognized because it was the expression of a man who had learned not to hope for anything from anyone he did not already know. And Aiden said the first words he had spoken in this world. His voice was a rasp. He said, "Where does your water come from?" The girl blinked. She had not expected a question. She had expected a thank you, or a name, or a confession, or a prayer. She had not expected a question about water. She said, "The spring, up the back ridge, half a mile." "How long?" Aiden said, and he had to stop and swallow. "How long has the family drunk from that spring?" The father answered from the wheelchair. He said, "My grandfather dug the stones around it, so 80 years, maybe 90. Aiden closed his eyes. He felt the cup in his hands, and he felt the warmth of the fire on his face, and he felt the impossible, ridiculous, miraculous fact of being alive in a body that was not burned and not buried, and he felt the weight of 7 people who had given him their last potato, and he opened his eyes and he said, very quietly, so the little girls in the back room would not hear, "It's not a curse." The father did not move. He said, "What isn't?" "Your legs," Aiden said. "The shelves. The brother who died. The hired man who left. Whatever the people in this valley call it, whatever they whisper about at night, it's not a curse. It's the water. There's something in the water." The room went very quiet. The grandmother had come in from the back room with an armful of kindling, and she stopped in the doorway. The pregnant mother had been at the hearth, and she stopped stirring the pot. The girl Selena, with the empty cup now in her hands, looked from Aiden to her father and back again. The father said, slowly, "Who are you?" And Aiden Steelblade, lying in a stranger's bed in a stranger's house in a valley he had not chosen, said, "I'm somebody who knows what poison tastes like, and I owe you my life, so let me pay it back." That was the first morning. I want you to hold that morning in your mind, because everything that comes next is built on it. Everything. The hunts, the hidden ore vein, the spring sealed with clay, the rainwater catchment, the teenage girl who became a huntress, the healthy boy born 6 months later, the rival village that came with axes, the 2 stags on the shoulders at dawn. All of it grows out of that single cup of water and the words that followed. Now, here is what Aiden did not say out loud that first morning. He did not say that he had died. He did not say that he was from somewhere else. He did not say the word firefighter because the word would have meant nothing to them. He understood very quickly that the language he was speaking was not English and never had been, and yet he understood every word the family said, and they understood every word he said, and he stopped asking himself why. There would be time later to ask questions like that. There was not time now. Now there was a valley to save and a debt to pay. The first thing he did when he could stand was walk up the ridge to the spring. It took him most of a morning because his legs were weak and the snow was deep. Selena came with him. He had not asked her to. She had simply put on her shawl and followed him out the door, and after the first 100 yards, he had stopped trying to send her back because he understood that she was not coming to help him. She was coming to learn. She had been waiting, this girl, for a very long time, for someone to walk somewhere that mattered so that she could walk behind them. The spring was beautiful. That was the first cruelty of it. A stone-rimmed pool the size of a wagon wheel set into a hollow in the rock, fed by a slow trickle from a fissure higher up. The water was clear. It looked like the cleanest water in the world. Aiden knelt beside it. He cupped a handful. He smelled it. He let it spill. He tasted it again, just a touch on his tongue, and the metallic note was stronger here than it had been in the cup. Of course it was. The cup had been drawn the night before and had stood for hours. The taste settles in water like that. The longer it sits, the more the metal leaches out of solution and the more it concentrates against the wood of the cup. He stood up. He looked uphill. The fissure went somewhere. The water came from somewhere. And whatever was in the water came from somewhere too. "Selena," he said, "I need you to do something for me." "Yes," she said, immediately, without asking what. "I need you to go home. I need you to tell your father to stop drinking from this spring. Today. Right now. Tell him to melt snow instead until I get back. Tell him I said so. Tell him I will explain when I return." "Where are you going?" Up, Aiden said. I'm going to find what's poisoning your family. She looked at him for a long moment. She was 16 years old. Her father had not walked unassisted in 5 years. Her uncle had died of the same wasting in his legs. Her mother was pregnant with a child the whole valley expected to be born wrong, because the children in this valley had been born wrong for as long as anyone living could remember. And here was a stranger her father's age, standing in the snow at the spring, telling her that all of it had a reason, and that the reason was upstream, and that he was going to find it. She said, I'm coming with you. He almost argued. He almost said no. And then he remembered the cup of water she had handed him that morning, and the look on her face when she had said the word "Pa" in the snow. And he understood that this girl had been carrying her family on her shoulders since she was 12 years old, and that telling her to go home now would be the deepest insult he could possibly offer her. He said, then keep up. They climbed. The fissure widened into a gully, and the gully widened into a cleft in the rock, and the cleft opened, eventually, onto a high shelf where the snow was thin and the wind had scoured the stone bare. And there, in the bare stone, Aiden saw what he had been afraid he would see. A vein. A dark, glittering, wet-looking vein in the rock, the color of old bruises, threaded through with bright greenish-yellow crystals that caught the winter light. Water seeped from above it, ran across it, and disappeared down into the cleft below. Every drop of water that fed that tiny amounts for years and years will settle in a human body and eat the nerves out of the legs first, because the legs are the longest nerves and the most exposed. He knew that those pieces will make children be born small and weak. He knew that they will make the men in a valley start to fail at 29 and be in a wheelchair by 34. And he knew, looking at that vein, that the Hollowfield family had been drinking it, 1 cup at a time, for 90 years. He turned to Selena. Her face was pale. She had not understood what she was looking at, but she had understood his face when he had seen it. This, he said, and he pointed at the vein. This is the curse, this rock right here. The water runs over it and it carries something we cannot see down to the spring. Your father has been drinking it since he was a baby. Your grandfather, your great-grandfather, everyone in this valley who drinks from this spring or any spring that runs out of these rocks. That is why the men's legs fail. That is why the babies come small. That is why your uncle died. It is not a curse. It is this rock. Selena did not cry. She looked at the vein for a long time. And then she said, "Can we stop it?" And Aiden Steelblade, 27 years old in a body that was somehow also younger, who had died once in a burning house in a city she would never see, said, "Yes, we can stop it. We are going to seal this spring. We are going to catch the snow and the rain in barrels. We are going to dig a new well away from this rock, and we are going to find out which springs in this valley are safe and which are not. And then I am going to teach you to hunt, because your family needs meat, and meat is going to come from animals that drink the high streams above this rock, and those animals are clean. Do you understand me?" She nodded. She did not say yes. She nodded. And she turned without another word and started back down the gully toward home, because she had work to do. That night, at the Hollowfield table, Aiden told the family everything. He did not tell them about Portland. He did not tell them about the fire. He told them about the rock and the water and the slow poison, and he told them what they were going to do about it. The grandmother listened with her one tooth showing because her mouth was slightly open. The mother listened with one hand on her belly. The little girls, who he had finally met properly, listened with enormous eyes. The father listened with his hands folded on the table and his withered legs hidden under a blanket. And when Aiden was done, the father said only one thing. He said, "If you are wrong, we starve faster. If you are right, we live. Either way, we are dead if we do nothing. So we will do what you say." That is how it began. The next morning, before sunrise, Aiden took the old axe off the wall and he walked up the ridge with Selena and they sealed the spring. They sealed it with clay from the riverbank, lower down, and with stones, and with pine boughs stuffed in between, and they cut the channel from above so that the water went a different way, around the vein instead of across it. It took them 3 days. The work was brutal. Selena's hands bled through her gloves. Aiden's back gave out twice. But on the third day, the spring was sealed, and a new channel ran clean water down a different course, and Aiden tasted it, and it was clean, and he gave a cupful to Selena, and she tasted it, and her face changed in a way that I cannot describe to you except to say that she had never, in 16 years of life, tasted water that did not have the metal in it. She drank the whole cup. She drank a second one. And then she sat down in the snow and she cried for the first time, because she had finally understood, fully, what had been done to her family for 90 years. That was the first week. The second week, Aiden hunted. He had never hunted in his life. He had been a city kid, but he had been trained to read terrain, to move quietly, to think about wind, to think about pressure and timing and the moment a thing is going to happen before it happens. And those skills, it turned out, were enough. He took the longbow that had belonged to Selena's dead uncle off the wall, and he restrung it with sinew the grandmother had been saving for snares, and he walked up into the high country alone on the first morning, and he came back, just before dark, with a single deer across his shoulders. The family ate meat that night for the first time in 5 months. Tomas Hollowfield wept at the table, not loudly, quietly, with his face turned away. The pregnant mother fed the little girls slowly because she knew their stomachs would cramp if they ate too fast. The grandmother chewed her piece with her one tooth for what felt like an hour. And Selena watched Aiden across the table the whole meal, and when she had finished her portion, she said, "Teach me." He did. The third week, he took her up into the high country with him. He taught her how to read deer track in snow. He taught her how to tell a fresh print from one that had thawed and refrozen. He taught her how to move with the wind in her face. He taught her how to draw the bow without trembling. He taught her how to wait. The waiting was the hardest part. She was 16 and she wanted to move. He told her again and again that the best hunters in the world are the ones who can stand still longer than anything else in the forest. And she learned. She learned faster than he had expected. By the end of the third week, she brought down her first rabbit on her own, and she carried it home with her chin in the air the way a person carries something they have earned with their own hands for the first time. The fourth week, Aiden built a rainwater catchment. He took the empty barrels from the cellar, the ones that used to hold flour and salted meat and were now just empty, and he set them under the eaves of the cabin and the barn, and he ran wooden gutters along the roof lines to feed them. The next snow that fell, when it melted on the roof, ran into the barrels. The next rain, the same. Within a month, the family had 3 full barrels of clean water that had never touched the poisoned rock, and Aiden taught the grandmother how to ladle it carefully without stirring the silt at the bottom, and how to boil it before drinking, even though it was already clean, because boiling never hurts, and his training in Portland had drilled that into him until it was reflex. The 5th week, the first neighbor came. She was an old woman from a cabin 2 miles down the valley. She had heard, in the way news travels in places where there is no other entertainment, that the Hollowfield family had a stranger living with them, and that the stranger had done something to the spring, and that the Hollowfield father, who had not stood unassisted in 5 years, had been seen on his own feet leaning against the porch rail for almost a full minute the previous Sunday. The old woman knocked on the door at mid-morning. She was carrying a small cloth bag of dried apples, which was everything she had to give, and she asked, with her eyes on the floor because she was ashamed to ask, whether the stranger would come and look at her son's well. Aiden looked at her. He looked at the apples in her hands. He looked at Tomas Hollowfield in the wheelchair by the door, who was watching him with that careful, neutral expression that Aiden had learned by then, meant Tomas was waiting to see what kind of man Aiden truly was. Aiden said, "Keep your apples, I'll come tomorrow." He went the next morning. He took Selena. They walked 2 miles down the valley to the old woman's son's cabin, and they tasted the water from his well, and it was bad. And they walked up his ridge and they found another vein, smaller than the first, but the same family of rock, and they sealed it the same way. And the son, who was 31 and could barely walk anymore, watched them work from a stool his wife had carried out into the snow for him. When they were done, the son's wife pressed the bag of dried apples into Selena's hands and would not take no for an answer, and Selena carried it home with the strangest expression on her face. And at the table that night she said, "Pa, they gave us apples for doing the work." And Tomas said, "Yes." And Selena said, "Why?" And Tomas said, "Because that is how it begins, daughter, slowly, with apples." By the second month, 4 families in the valley had come asking. By the third month, 11. Aiden could not seal all the springs himself, so he taught. He taught the men who could still walk how to find the bad rock by its color and its glitter. He taught the women how to set up rainwater barrels. He taught the older children how to test a spring by leaving a polished copper coin in it for a week and watching what happened to the coin. And the valley, very slowly, started to drink clean water for the first time in 3 generations. By the 4th month, Tomas Hollowfield stood up out of his wheelchair without help and walked, very slowly, across the kitchen to where his wife was kneading bread, and he put his hand on the small of her back, the way he used to before his legs had failed, and she turned around with flour on her cheek, and she looked at him standing on his own feet in his own kitchen, and she did not say anything, and he did not say anything, and they just looked at each other for a long time. By the 5th month, Aiden walked out of the tree line one morning at dawn with 2 stags across his shoulders, both of them taken clean. Both of them dropped within an hour of sunrise on the high ridge above the valley, with arrows shot by him and by Selena, who had been hunting beside him for 3 months by then, and who had finally, that morning, made her first kill on a full-grown buck. He had carried both animals himself because he wanted her to walk into the cabin yard with empty hands and her bow on her back, and let the family understand, by looking at her face, that she had been the one who had brought the 2nd stag down. That is the image I gave you at the beginning. Sunrise the color of a healing bruise, smoke from the one cabin, 2 stags on Aiden's shoulders, Tomas weeping on the porch because he was standing on his own legs to greet his daughter the huntress coming home, the grandmother with the bread, the mother, who by then was within weeks of delivering, with one hand pressed to her belly and the other over her mouth. The 2 little girls running through the snow in their stocking feet because nobody had remembered to make them put their boots on. That is the image, and now you know what is inside it. The boy was born 3 weeks later. He was healthy. He was the right size. He cried strongly. He nursed without trouble. He was the first healthy boy born in the Hollowfield Valley in 28 years, and when the grandmother held him and looked at his little legs, which were strong and straight and pink with good blood, she dropped very slowly to her knees on the floor of the cabin, and she pressed her forehead to the floorboards, and she did not get up for a long time. Nobody disturbed her. Selena went to the window and she watched the snow falling outside, and she did not cry, but her hand was pressed flat against the window pane, the way a person's hand presses against glass when they are trying to touch something on the other side that they cannot reach. And Aiden stood beside her, and he did not speak, because there are moments that do not need words, and that was one of them. The trouble came in the 7th month. By the 7th month, the Hollowfield Valley was different. Smoke rose from cabins that had been cold for years. Children ran in the lanes between houses because their legs had grown strong enough to run. Men who had spent years in chairs were walking again, slowly, painfully, but walking. The neighboring valleys had begun to notice. Word had spread the way word spreads in country places, by horse and by foot, and by one cousin telling another cousin at a winter market, and the word was simple. There is a stranger in the Hollowfield Valley. He found the poison in the water. He showed the families how to seal it. The men are walking again. The children are being born right. Most of the people who heard that word were happy for the valley. Some of them came asking for the same help, and Aiden gave it freely. But there is, in any country, a kind of man who hears about a place that has suddenly become richer than it was last year, and what that man hears is not good news. What that man hears is opportunity. They came on a morning in the 7th month, 12 of them, from the next valley over, the Kennick Valley, which had its own water problems and its own crippled men, but also had a man named Bren Kennick who had decided, when he heard about the Hollowfield Spring, that the simplest solution to his own valley's problem was to take the Hollowfield Spring for himself. He brought his 11 cousins. They had axes, and they had 2 crossbows, and they had the kind of look on their faces that men get when they have already decided what they are going to do and are only waiting for an excuse to do it. They rode up the lane to the Hollowfield cabin at mid-morning. Tomas was on the porch. He had a cup of tea in his hand. He stood up when he saw them coming, on his own legs, and he set the cup down on the rail, and he waited. Aiden came out behind him. Selena came out behind Aiden with her bow in her hand, but not strung. The grandmother stood in the doorway. The mother stayed inside with the children. Bren Kennick reined in his horse 20 feet from the porch. He looked at Tomas Hollowfield standing on his own 2 legs. He looked at Aiden. He looked at the bow in Selena's hand. He smiled with the lower half of his face only. He said, "We've come to talk about the spring." Aiden said, "Which spring?" "The one you sealed, the clean one, up the back ridge." "There is no clean one up the back ridge anymore. We sealed it because the rock was poisoning the family. The clean water in this valley comes from the rain barrels and from the high streams above the Orlands. That is the water you would want." Bren Kennick's smile did not move. He said, "I think there is still water at that spring. I think you have just rerouted it. I think with the right men and the right tools, we could open it again and run it to my valley. I think that would solve a great deal of trouble for a great many families." "It would kill them," Aiden said. "The water from that spring is what crippled this valley for 90 years. If you open it and you drink it, your children will be born wrong and your men will be in chairs by 34. That is your opinion. It is a fact. The proof is standing on this porch with a cup of tea on the rail." Bren Kennick's eyes shifted to Tomas. He looked at Tomas's legs. He looked at Tomas's face. And something in him, I think, in that moment, knew. He knew that what Aiden was saying was true. He knew that the cure had been the sealing, not the spring. He knew that if he tore open that spring and ran it to his valley, he would be ladling slow poison into the mouths of his own children. And he decided, the way some men decide, that it did not matter. Because he had come here with 12 men and axes and crossbows, and he had told them they were going to bring home water, and he was not the kind of man who could ride home and tell 12 cousins that he had been wrong. Pride is a heavier thing than any barrel of water that was ever carried. He said, "Step aside." Aiden stepped forward instead, not toward the riders, toward the porch rail. He picked up Tomas's cup of tea. He held it out toward Bren Kennick. He said, "Drink this first." "What?" "It is water from the spring you want. I kept a jar of it, sealed, from the day before we closed the rock. If the water is good, drink the cup. Then take your men up the ridge and open it and ride home heroes. If the water is bad, leave." Bren Kennick stared at him. "Drink it," Aiden said. "I will drink it with you, 1 cup each, right now, in front of your men. If we are both fine in the morning, the spring is yours. If only one of us is fine, that man was right. Drink." It was not a real wager. Aiden knew that 1 cup of that water would not kill a grown man in a morning. The poison was a generational poison, a slow leaching thing, a betrayal measured in decades. 1 cup proved nothing. But Aiden also knew something about men like Bren Kennick. He knew that a man who has come to take a thing by force cannot be argued out of it with facts, but he can sometimes be derailed by a moment of public theater. Because the moment Aiden offered to drink the cup himself, the question stopped being, "Is the water good?" and became, "Is Bren Kennick brave enough to drink first?" And the 12 cousins behind him, whose families would be the ones drinking this water if he succeeded, started, very quietly, to wait for his answer. Bren Kennick did not drink. He sat on his horse for a long moment. Then he laughed, the kind of laugh that is meant to cover something. He said, "I am not going to play your games, stranger." "Then leave my valley," Tomas Hollowfield said, from the porch, with his cup of tea in his other hand and his withered legs holding him up, and his daughter at his back with her bow. And Bren Kennick, after a long pause in which something in his face shifted in a way that I think he himself did not understand, turned his horse, and his 12 cousins turned their horses behind him, and they rode out of the Hollowfield Valley, and they did not come back. Tomas sat down slowly on the bench by the porch rail. His legs were shaking because he had been standing for almost 20 minutes, which was longer than he had stood in 5 years. He picked up his cup of tea. He drank it. He did not look at Aiden. He said, very quietly, "I would have fought them." "I know," Aiden said. "You did not let me." "No." "Why?" Aiden sat down beside him on the bench. He thought about it for a long moment. He said, "Because a man who has just learned how to walk again should not have to fight on his first long day." Tomas did not answer for a while. Then he set his cup down. He put one hand on Aiden's shoulder. He left it there. He did not say thank you. He had stopped saying thank you to Aiden months ago, because thank you had become too small a word for what was passing between them, and they had both quietly agreed, without ever discussing it, that it was better to say nothing at all than to say something insufficient. That was the 7th month. In the 9th month, Tomas Hollowfield walked, unassisted, all the way from the cabin to the upper pasture and back. It took him most of an afternoon. The little girls walked beside him and held his hands, one on each side, although by then he did not really need their hands. He let them hold him anyway because they wanted to. In the 11th month, Aiden asked the mother, whose name was Alara, whether he might court her eldest daughter when the time came. Not for now, for when she was older. He wanted to ask now, he said, because he did not want to ask later and have her wonder whether he had been thinking it the whole time without telling. Ilara looked at him for a long moment, and then she said, "Selena will choose when she chooses, but you have my blessing to be chosen." Selena chose him 2 years later. They were married in the spring, in the upper pasture, in front of the whole valley, and the grandmother, who was still alive and still had her one tooth, cried so hard at the ceremony that the 2 little girls had to take turns holding her hands. Tomas walked his daughter to the altar. He walked the whole way. He did not stumble once. Aiden and Selena raised 6 children together. 3 of their own and 3 orphans from a fever that swept through the lower valley in the 4th year. 2 boys and a girl whose parents had died and whose grandmother had brought them to the Hollowfield door because she had heard, in the way news still traveled, that the family in the cabin took in strangers and made them whole. They took the children in. They raised them as their own. Selena became, in time, the most respected huntress in 3 valleys, and she taught her daughters to hunt, and her daughters taught theirs, and the Hollowfield name became, in that country, the name people spoke when they meant a family that took people in. Tomas died peacefully in the 14th year. He was 48 years old, which, in his valley, in his generation, was an old age that almost no man had reached. He died in his own bed, with his wife holding one hand and Aiden holding the other, and the last thing he said was the name of his first grandson, who had just learned to walk that week and who was sleeping in a basket at the foot of the bed. Aiden buried him in the upper pasture, in the same ground where he had married Selena, and he carved the headstone himself, and the headstone said only this: Tomas Hollowfield. He stood up. Salvation, my friends, is not a single act. It is not the moment you pull someone from the snow. It is not the moment you find the poisoned rock. It is not the moment you put 2 stags down on a porch at dawn. Salvation is the shape a life takes when it refuses to walk away. It is the choice, made again every morning, to stay in the house where they gave you their last potato. It is the choice to seal one more spring, to teach one more child, to carry one more cup of water that has never touched the bad rock. Salvation is repetition. Salvation is patience. Salvation is the long, slow, quiet refusal to let the people who once saved you die of anything you could have prevented. Aiden Steelblade had died once, in a city he loved, in a country he would never see again, under the weight of a roof he had walked into willingly because there was a child inside. He had died well. He had nothing to be ashamed of in his first life. But in his second life, in a valley he had not chosen, in a body that was somehow younger and somehow still his, he learned the lesson that the first life had not had time to teach him. He learned that the work is not the single brave act. The work is the staying. The work is the years afterward, when the fire is out and the child is safe and everyone has gone home and you are still there, in the kitchen, teaching a teenage girl how to read the wind. I want to leave you with one more image before I close. It is from the 17th year. Aiden is 44. His hair is going gray at the temples. He is sitting on the same porch where Tomas used to sit, in the same wheelchair Tomas built, because Aiden's back finally went out the previous winter and Selena had insisted he use it while it healed. He is holding a small grandson in his lap. The grandson is 18 months old and has fat, strong legs and is trying to climb down to chase a chicken. Selena is in the yard with her bow across her back, teaching their youngest daughter how to draw it without trembling. The grandmother is dead by then, 8 years dead, but her one tooth is still spoken of at every family meal because the family has made a small joke of it, the way families make jokes of the dead they loved most. The valley is full of smoke from full hearths. The cabin is warm. The water in the cup beside Aiden is clean, and a rider is coming up the lane. The rider is dressed in colors that nobody in the Hollowfield Valley has ever seen, deep blue and silver, with a crest on his shoulder that means a kingdom 3 weeks' ride to the east. He stops at the porch. He looks down at Aiden with the toddler in his lap and the chicken running circles around the legs of the wheelchair. He says, "Are you the hunter who broke the curse?" Aiden looks up at him. He shifts the toddler to one knee. He says, "I am the man who lives here. My king has sent me. There is a valley to the east of us. It is dying of something worse than poison. The men there do not lose their legs, they lose their minds. They forget their own children. They wander into the snow in midsummer. The healers cannot find a cause. We have heard in our country that there is a man in a western valley who once found a cause that no one else could find. We have heard the name Steelblade. My king begs you to come." Aiden does not answer for a long moment. He looks at Selena in the yard, who has stopped teaching the daughter and is looking back at him. He looks at the grandson on his knee, who has fallen asleep with his face pressed against Aiden's chest. He looks at the valley around him, which is, by every measure he knows, the most beautiful place in the world. He sets the grandson down, very carefully, on a folded blanket on the porch. He stands up out of the wheelchair, slowly, because his back is still healing, but he is going to stand for this. He looks at the rider. He says, "Come inside. Tell me about this valley. Tell me everything you know. I will eat with my family tonight, and I will think, and I will give you my answer in the morning." The rider dismounts. The door of the cabin opens. Selena, who has crossed the yard without Aiden noticing, comes up onto the porch beside him and puts her hand in his, the way she has put her hand in his every important morning of their life together since she was 19 years old. She looks at the rider. She looks at her husband. She says, very quietly, only for him, "Whatever you decide, I am coming with you." Aiden squeezes her hand. The door closes behind them. And that, my friends, is where this chronicle ends and where the next one begins. There is a valley to the east. There is a sickness there that takes the mind instead of the legs. There is a king who has heard a name, and there is a hunter and a huntress and a family who have not yet decided what they will do. But I know what they will decide, and I think by now you do too. Because salvation, once it has been learned, is not a thing a person can put down. It is the shape a life takes. It is the way a person walks into the next room and the next house and the next valley for as long as they have breath. My name is Luna. Thank you for walking this valley with me. The next valley is waiting. I will see you there.